Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene and I talk about eating disorder recovery and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food and with movement. And today we're going to jump right into the topic as we always do, and I want to talk about perfectionism and eating disorders. One of you guys actually commented something under my last video, and I love that you're so attentive, and you said you love how much I always keep the backgrounds of my videos the way they are. And honestly, before I filmed that very video, I was thinking about it. I was like, I could clean up everything, I want to make sure that the background looks very clean, and then I was like, why do I want to create a false scene that actually wouldn't be there if I would just leave it like this, because that's what my kitchen looks like right now and that is okay. But it took me a long time to get there. The one thing that I want to talk about today is that a lot of people who have a tendency to be perfectionists and wanting to control everything oftentimes also have a tendency to develop an eating disorder. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everyone who is a perfectionist will have an eating disorder, and also that doesn't mean that you have to be perfectionist in order to have an eating disorder, but we do see a lot of people who have both, and I see that a lot when I'm working with my clients. Many of you guys really struggle with OCD, or at least struggle with letting things be, with not planning everything through, and that is something that I have been through myself. Interestingly enough, I was a kid that was very chaotic, not planned through at all, but that wasn't really liked by a lot of people and I got into a lot of trouble. So I learned to become perfectionist, to control everything, to plan everything through so that I wouldn't get into trouble. And later on that turned into my eating disorder, but throughout my eating disorder I also developed a lot of other things. For instance, I had a really high urge to clean. I had to clean my apartment 2 or 3 times a day with like really deep cleaning. I had a really hard time to, not clean everything up before leaving. Everything had to be perfect, everything had to be planned through, and I had a really hard time letting that go. It actually was so bad that I thought it would never get better, and I definitely didn't even make the connection between my ED and that until I started to learn more about eating disorders. When I was in recovery, it felt like I didn't have the energy to do that anymore. But the part of me that wanted to have everything planned through and everything perfect was still very loud. So I think that was where the most distress happened, even though it had to happen for me to learn that nothing bad happens when I don't plan everything through and I don't have everything perfectly fine. But in that moment it felt so bad because, again, the urge was still there, but I didn't have the energy. I was so focused on recovery, and again, like, the recovery fatigue is real, and it's the body's way of showing us that we need to rest. But in that time frame, of course, I felt very bad for it, and I felt like I was doing something wrong and I wasn't that perfect person anymore, and I felt like, oh, I'm losing all these traits now that I'm losing my eating disorder, so it made me want to go back, which fortunately I didn't do. But these are a lot of things that I also hear and see in a lot of my clients. In order to get through that time, it can be extremely helpful to really understand the need or the fear behind that perfectionism. In my case, it was very clear. I was afraid to not be accepted, to get in trouble, to maybe seen as something worth less, or somebody worth less if I'm not perfect. And it also had to do with my fear of the future. I definitely had a lot of anticipation anxiety, and so planning everything through and making sure that everything is in line gave me this false sense of control. And I'm saying false sense of control because your eating disorder is no real control. It makes you feel like you're in control, but the one that is actually in control is your ED. And I'm telling that my clients all the time, because recovery is actually the way to real control. Now I'm living my life and I'm still organized. I will probably never be a person that isn't organized at all, and that's okay. There is nothing wrong with liking to organize things or liking to have things a certain way, but at the same time, I can definitely leave my house without cleaning it before. I can definitely have something not planned and not freaking out, and not getting anxiety anymore if my whole week isn't planned out. And these are the things that I mean. Real control is actually flexibility, and that is something that we have to get through in recovery. But while we are in recovery, it oftentimes feels worse because we feel like we lose all this control, we lose everything that we had before, and it kind of makes us feel like we're in this loose space where we lose everything, we haven't found our new normal, and that is why that recovery space can feel so wrong and so hard, when actually it is important to get through there. And of course, the controlling and the perfectionism shows a lot in our eating disorder behaviors. Whether it is controlling your food, planning your food, counting your food, weighing your food, and also your exercise, whether it's counting steps, having certain rules around it. Everything that is attached to numbers and to strict rules counts into that perfectionism state. Because again, we're not intuitive, we're not flexible, we're on the other side of the spectrum. When I talk about intuitive, I mean being intuitive with your movement. For instance, oh, I plan to go to the gym today, but I'm really not feeling well, so I'm not gonna go. Instead of saying, oh, I have to go so and so many days a week, so I have to go and I can't just take a break. Same thing with eating. If I'm planning something, I have to eat what I planned versus, oh, I'm just gonna decide in the moment. I'm just gonna see how hungry I am and what I'm hungry for. This is the type of flexibility that is real control, because it gives you the control to listen to your body instead of being controlled by your ED. Some practical tips when it comes to OCD and also like the perfectionism. And I understand that OCD can be like a very extreme way of that perfectionism. It is, called OCD for a reason. So if you feel like you need more help with that, there is nothing wrong with reaching out to a therapist or an OCD specialist, because oftentimes the things that I'm going to share now for perfectionism might still not work for OCD, because OCD has oftentimes many more underlying issues. And I also made a video about the link between OCD and EDs, because they're basically attacking the same parts of your brain. So if you're interested in that, you can also watch that video. But when it comes to practical tips, the first thing I want you to do is to ask yourself, okay, but what if? What if I'm not cleaning up right now? What if I'm not plan everything through right now? And that's why I'm saying there's a difference, because with OCD, a lot of intrusive thoughts can come up, a lot of irrational fears. So that is oftentimes where you might need a little bit more help. But oftentimes when we're talking about perfectionism, you will see that even if you find an answer, these answers are also very, very impacted by the perfectionism. So let's say I ask myself, okay, what if I don't clean up? And then my answer is, oh, I'm gonna come home to a house that's not clean and I'm not gonna be able to enter that feeling. That is my perfectionism. If I'm being honest, nothing will happen. The world will continue spinning, I will continue living, I will still be going by with my day, and nothing bad will happen. So doing that reality check is oftentimes a little bit helpful, because it helps you to understand that this fear and this type of perfectionism is more in your head than it is on the outside. The next step is to actually actively not do what the urge is telling you. And again, I completely understand how wrong that feels, and especially in recovery, sometimes the recovery fatigue comes in, so it kind of makes us not doing what the urge is telling us, but sometimes we feel like, oh, this is the last thing I have to hold on to keep some control in my recovery, and this is why it is so important to let go of it. So every time you feel like, oh, I have to clean up now, and it's like this strong urge and I can't do anything else before I do it, maybe you can try some habit stacking. Habit stacking means that before you jump right into cleaning up, you can do something else. That way you learn that you can clean up eventually. There is nothing wrong with cleaning up, but when it becomes so perfectionistic and you can't do anything else before it, then it becomes a problem, because then it occupies your thoughts and it occupies your whole day. So habit stacking basically means, instead of jumping right into it and cleaning up everything, you can try to put something else between it, to stack another habit. Whether it is watching TV for a certain amount of time, being on your phone, playing with your kids or your dog, or something completely different. It is not about finding the perfect mindful occupation, it is more about stacking your habits. And whatever you stack in between is a way of showing your brain that it's okay to leave it until a little bit later. Same thing when it comes to the way you're cleaning. I had to have everything perfect. What I mean by that is, when I started cleaning, I had to clean everything. There was no way for me to interrupt before I was done. I actually had to finish and had to do it in a perfect way. Nowadays, oftentimes I'm starting with one room and then I'm running out of time and I'm like, well, the other room has to wait until tomorrow, and that's okay. That's another way to interrupt this perfectionism. So sometimes not engaging with a thing at all can be helpful, but sometimes also interrupting the perfectionism within the habit. So instead of cleaning everything, allowing yourself to clean one room today and the other one tomorrow. And I'm very, very aware that perfectionism shows up in many more ways than just cleaning. That was just one example, because I see it in a lot of clients. Perfectionism, of course, shows a lot up when it comes to any numbers. Whether it's grades in school, whether it is grades in college, whether it's your weight, the amount you're eating, those are the perfect anchors for perfectionism because it lets you measure it. The whole reason why so many people are so obsessed with numbers is because it gives you an actual scale to measure something. Now, the emotion and the judgment that you're prescribing to the numbers, that is on you. For instance, I could say, oh, something that has more calories is good because it has more energy. That would be a completely logic idea for me as a coach. When you have an eating disorder, you will most probably not see it like this, and you will always choose the lower calorie number, and that plays into your perfectionism. But you see how the perspective matters and how what you think about a certain number and also like what emotions you prescribe to it really matters. The same thing with weight. As you guys know, I'm really not a fan of weighing yourself in recovery, but when it comes to weight, it's the same thing. It's not about the weight itself, it's about what you think about this weight, what judgment you have, what you see as your, like, some people have like a weight in mind and they're like, oh, I can't ever go higher than this. All that is kind of like rooted in your eating disorder, rooted in the perfectionism and all the judgment you prescribe to that number. So we have to learn to detach from these numbers. And of course you cannot just erase them, but you have to learn to go over and over and over them again. So for instance, if the perfectionism really holds on to eating as little as possible, the solution, or at least the way to get there, would be to eat more. And to every time when that perfectionism comes up, to have some kind of coping mechanism. Whether it's a reminder, an affirmation, some kind of distraction, or anything else that you can work out with your therapist or with your coach, but it can be extremely helpful to really actively go against these things. Some of you guys who work with me know that we're doing these things actively in coaching. So when I know that there's a certain habit, I will challenge you and I will ask you the next week, like, hey, how did that go? Oh, you still felt like you had to do it? Okay, let's try something else. It's not about doing everything perfectly, because that goes back to the perfectionism. It's about finding ways that work for you. And oftentimes in recovery, we run into exactly that problem. On the one hand, the eating disorder is still loud and all the things that play into that perfectionism are still there and still very loud. On the other hand, that person wants to do recovery perfectly. And so whenever they slip or something happens or they feel like, anything happens, they engage in a habit again, they feel like a failure and they can't even do recovery. At the same time, the eating disorder is happy again, and it becomes this whole big thing where you don't even know which voice to listen to. That is where a therapist or a coach comes in to really help you to separate all these thoughts and emotions, and to also let you know it is okay that things are not going perfectly right now. As I always say, recovery is messy, recovery is chaotic, and definitely not linear. And especially the first phase, the chaos phase, those of you who know me for a while know those 3 phases of healing. The chaos phase is definitely the phase where we actually want the messiness. We want the chaos, because that's part of the whole reorganizing process. So it's perfectly fine if things are not going perfectly well in the beginning or even throughout recovery, because there is no perfect in recovery. And going through this process will really teach you how to see things from a different standpoint and how to learn that perfectionism is not always necessary. Another thing when it comes to the controlling part and really planning out things, that happens with recovery as well. Most people really want to know how long it's going to take, whether we'll end up with weight-wise, what their body will look like, how long they're going to have extreme hunger, how long it's going to take for them to get rid of the thoughts. And as I said in another video before, nobody can tell you, because there are so many different factors that play into it, and that's okay. Whether your recovery takes half a year or 3 years, that is totally fine. No one is better or worse for that, but we cannot tell you that in the beginning. And this part, this letting go of the control, not knowing how long it's going to take, is probably one of the hardest part in recovery, but it's also one of the parts that holds the most growth and that allows you to really, really learn so much. Because when we challenge this fear of not being able to control, of not being able to plan, and we still go through it, then we learn from that it's going to be okay. And at the end of your recovery, you're going to look back and you say, oh, I had no idea. This was all not planned, but I made it through. So this is a learning for me for other parts of my life that I'm going to make it through. And I'm actually reminding myself of that all the time. Whether something in my life is happening where I don't have the control, where I can't really plan, where I don't know how things are going to look like in half a year or a year, I'm telling myself that I made it through the situations before. There were so many days and weeks and months in my life where I didn't have any plan and where I couldn't really plan the future, and I still made it through, so this time I'm going to make it through as well. I really hope this video helped you guys. Let me know in the comments how you cope with perfectionism, how your recovery and also your eating disorder play into it, and as always, if you have other questions. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.